cities in Flanders. That was Diederik van den Elzas. And this new count had to recognize, because he had the support of the cities, had to recognize the autonomy of the cities. And he granted charters to all the cities in Flanders. And in these charters, a very wide autonomy was given to the cities. Okay, so that is somewhat, I think, a very important element in our evolution. Now, if you look to these cities, of course, these cities were not libertarian model states, but nevertheless, there were a key element in what we call a polycentric society, and that's a libertarian notion, polycentric society. A monocentric society is somewhat the view of the socialist. You have a central point in society, a central point which can gather all relevant knowledge to rule the people, and which needs also a huge concentration of power. That's a monocentric view. Liberals, classical liberals, are polycentric, saying no. Societies should have many independent centers, individuals, associations, which can use their own knowledge, because you cannot gather all knowledge spread in society. So if you concentrate knowledge, you lose a lot of knowledge, and you impoverish, in fact, the knowledge base of your policy. So you should leave a lot of decentralization in a society that allows freedom, but allows also efficiency, in the sense that the human human knowledge is better used for the increase of wealth in society. So, and cities were a very important element in this polycentric system of the Middle Ages, and contributed in this way a lot to the economic expansion of Europe. If you look now to some traits of how these cities worked. We have a lot of documentation about the Flemish cities, but if you compare with German, French, Italian cities, you see common traits. First, the cities got the autonomy to make their own law. So the count said, okay, in the charter, you can make your own law. Which is quite interesting. Suppose Ostend could get the autonomy to make its own law, autonomous from Chris Peters and somebody there in the federal government, nobody knows who. I think it would be an improvement for Ostend, because they had to pay for themselves also. Then I think they would not elect a socialist mayor anymore, but rather Jean-Marie de Decker, if they would be an independent unity. Okay, so they had the autonomy of making their own law, their own statutes. What is striking is that with regard to this personal status of the citizens, there was no more slavery, no more serfdom in the cities. Every citizen of the city, the word comes from city in fact, was a free person. So, and if you managed to live, to flee into a city and to live 1 year and 1 day in the city, then you became a free person. So that's a first point. Secondly, most property in the city was free property, was allodial property, was unburdened property. So the feudal relationships you had on the countryside did not exist anymore in the city. Sometimes you see in the cities the name vrije erven. What is the meaning of that? Well, people had to pay taxes to the city. The taxes were very minimal, but you could buy off your obligation to be taxed by capitalizing, in fact, your future tax debts by paying one lump sum, and then we were free from taxes. And then the house was a vrije erven, so that is the meaning. So you had all these deals in the city. Contract law was liberalized, so in most cities adopted the the deformalization of contracts, the free consent of contracts was enough for binding. The law of evidence, which was very backward on the countryside. You had, for instance, the rule that if there was in a legal contest, there was a contradiction between the versions of two parties, then one way to solve that was to throw people into the water. And if the people came up of the water, then the water did not want these people, so he was lying. But if he drowned, then he was probably speaking the truth. So, or you could take a glowing iron, and then they look to your wounds, how they were curing, in order to decide whether you were lying or not. So that were the ways in which trials were decided before. The cities reformed the law of evidence and relied more and more on documents, paper documents, and so on, and witnesses, and removed these very primitive, backward laws of evidence. I just want to say, by giving people autonomy, working people the autonomy, there is a pressure to remove all these reactionary and primitive ways of dealing with the competition. The jurisdiction, the law, the courts in the cities. The most important court of the city was, of course, the court of the Scabini, Schepenen. It's very important. Now we see the Scabini, the older men. They are an administrative body. They are ruling the city. But in the Middle Ages, their most important task was to be a court. They were a court, and they were judging about the contest among people. But they had no monopoly. They had no monopoly in the city. There were, in many cases, other courts like the canonical court, merchant courts, and so on. So people had the choice between different courts. There were competing legal systems throughout Europe, also in the cities. With regard to, that's also a very important element in the cities. With regard to crime. For crime, and I'm talking about manslaughter, theft, wounding people. In the Middle Ages, you had the system of the blood feud. And the blood feud created a link between families, extended families. Suppose you had a tortfeasor, a member of family A, family B, a tortfeasor, and this tortfeasor kills a member of family B. Then what was the consequence of the blood feuding system? Then the members of family B had the right to revenge against all the members of the family of the tortfeasor of the criminal. That was the system. And they could do the same. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That was basically the system before the year 1000. Is this irrational? Is this primitive? Of course it's primitive, but within an environment where you don't have organized jurisdiction, it's maybe not a good system, because of course the members of the family have an incentive to keep their most violent people under control, because if they do not control them, then it could backfire on them. So in this sense, in the absence of organized justice, blood feuding is maybe rational. It's not optimal, but it's maybe rational. Now what we see in the cities, the cities did not abolish this system. So they had, for crimes and so on, they did not develop a criminal code with police and so on. They kept relying on the blood feuding system. It was only in the 15th century, quite late, that Philip the Goede, the Burgundian Philip the Fair, I think is the translation, the Burgundian Duke abolished the system in the cities. And that is quite astonishing. You see, well, this is the cities who were the most progressive institutions in the Middle Ages, modernizing a lot of things, developing trade, developing intellectual life, and so on, kept their blood feuding system and did not develop to a modern system of the criminal law. But if you look more closer, you see that, in fact, the blood feuding system was indeed kept by the cities. But the cities civilized it to a large extent. For instance, but maybe I should make another remark. When we look to the history, the blood feud, mostly the blood feud was ended, never came to fighting, to actual fighting with the blood feud. It was, in most of the cases, it ended with what we call composition, an agreement between the parties in which this family pledges and promises to pay damages to the other party. So they make a deal, and in exchange, this party does not promises to abandon its right to revenge. So no revenge, but damages. The revenge is bought off by damages. This is also the old base of our civil law responsibility. So in 95%, probably, or even more, of the cases, it ended in composition. But of course, in the chronicles, in the medieval chronicles, the situations where you had infighting, they are of course largely dealt with because they are more spectacular. Like for instance in Ghent you had two families and they were fighting against each other during 80 years with numerous killings even in the cathedral of St. Bavs. And they ended, the people of Ghent, not so much people of Ghent, David, but they ended by making an agreement finally and to build a hospital. And the hospital where now the Museum of Folklore is, that's the Kinderen Alliance Hospital. That is the hospital which was built to end the feud. But that was only the minority of the case. So the blood feud is not as bloody as it seems at first sight. But what the cities did, first they imposed a truce, a troika, of 40 days in quarantine. And that is quite rational. That is to, immediately after the crime, people are of course enraged and commit enraged acts to calm down people. So you are not entitled to revenge the first 40 days. And the city ordered that people had to remain calm. And in most cases it worked. It was calming down, and then people went to table and made an agreement. Secondly, in many cases, if damages were promised, mostly hostages were given. Somebody here had to be given as a hostage and remained a slave during a certain time until the damages were paid. The cities kept this, but the hostages were then kept in a kind of city prison where they could go on working and could take their weaving chair with them until the debt was paid, and then they were liberated again. So thirdly, the city provided also judges. They were called paisires. in Bruges, Paisiris. And there were people who were mediators in order to settle the thing. And the activity of the Paisiris was very intense. If you look in the archives of Bruges and so on, you see many, many, many settlements